Welcome to I Wish You Could Hear This, where we explore great stories and simple proven steps to help you thrive in life, faith, and relationships.
In our research, we've heard hundreds of hope-filled strategies for marriage, parenting, leadership, and life that are grounded in science and consistent with biblical truth. And now you can hear them too.
I'm Shaunti Feldhahn.
And I'm Jeff Feldhahn. And on today's podcast, we're going to be talking about one of mine and Shaunti's favorite research projects.
Oh, yes.
What were the secrets of the happiest marriages?
What are they doing differently than the rest of us, as you always say?
Mere mortals.
What are they doing differently? And we found a bunch of them, but today on the podcast, we want to talk about one of them. And there's a reason why we are starting early on in this new podcast of ours. There's a reason that we want to cover this right up front.
Because it's such a critical piece of information or piece of the puzzle that we just really need to get.
That we need to get. And one of the things I was telling you, I was speaking at a women's event for women in ministry about a week and a half ago. And this was classic, where one of the women who helps her husband run a ministry for pastors and who they themselves were a pastor and wife, and she came up to me and she said they went through a really, really rough season. And they needed a change. They needed something to change. And so, and we've talked about this. They ended up deciding they were going to read a book every month. And she said
to work on their marriage?
To work on their marriage.
Okay.
And so one of our books, The Surprising Secrets of Highly Happy Marriages, which is the one that's based on the research about what makes the happiest couples, that was one of the books. And she said, I will tell you that this secret, the one that we're about to talk about today, she said that helped change everything. And we refer back to it all the time.
So what is that secret?
So what we found, and one of the most pivotal things that the happiest couples do that anybody can do, and candidly, that we need to do if we are going to create a great marriage, is to choose to believe the best of your spouse's intentions, even when you're legitimately hurt. Because everybody gets hurt. Everybody.
As we often say when we're doing a live event.
Well, somebody in one of our interviews said this first.
This is true. Said, look, even the kindest, sweetest, most godly individual here on the planet can be a jerk at times. And, I know I certainly fall into that category.
Well,
I'm not saying you.
We all do. Well, we might have had a little spat that we were originally supposed to be recording this 3 days ago, and we kind of got into a little bit of an issue, and we had to put this in practice ourselves, and so we didn't actually record this episode that day.
and actually, we'll unpack that a little later.
Yeah.
But one of the things that you just said, we actually didn't put that in practice immediately.
Right.
For all of these things that we're going to be sharing with you over the months to come. These are things that we have to apply.
Yeah.
They don't come naturally necessarily to all of us, and we're not necessarily able to apply them immediately in the heat of the moment.
Now, some people, this is one of the reasons we did this study with the happiest couples, is because we were trying to figure out what is it that they had learned to apply, maybe in the heat of the moment, maybe a day later, right? But what was it that really mattered? And so, do you mind if I just unpack we found?
Go.
You mind?
I don't mind.
To unpack this secret, this incredibly important, simple habit of believing the best of your spouse's intentions when you're hurt, here is what it looks like. Just so you guys know, we will get to our little story and the spat that caused us to delay this particular recording in a little bit. But here is the actual thing that we found statistically matters. So it turns out that most of us, when we are hurt, we have this natural sense of ow, right? Like the pain, somebody said something, which I might hypothetically have said something to Jeff a couple of days ago, but something hurts, and we have this natural reaction, which is just a human reaction of, she knew how that would make me feel. right? Like nothing I do is ever good enough for her. Or if something hypothetically was coming from Jeff to me, it might be like, ow, like he knew how that would make me feel and he said it anyway. And we don't realize when we are thinking those things, even if it's subconscious, what we're thinking is this person doesn't care about me.
Right.
And what we found that the happiest couples did was fascinating. They had the same ow, they had the same pain, and then they stopped it and they said, nope, I'm not going to let my thoughts go in that direction. I know he loves me, or I know she appreciates me. So they must not have known how that would make me feel, or they wouldn't have said it. It's flipping it. And what we found is that it is almost impossible to have a happy marriage without that.
Fascinating. Now, that's to the listener.
Yeah.
They go, yeah, that sounds good, but isn't that really just kind of wishful thinking that they do really love me or respect me or whatever the term is?
Yeah, well, I mean, I know that you and I talked about that early on as we were hearing, because what we were hearing, people didn't say the words, I choose to believe the best of my spouse's intentions. They don't say that. They say things like, well, listen, I realized I needed to give him the benefit of the doubt. Or I realized she could not have meant it the way that she sounded, the way that it came across. And so that's what's actually going on. And what we were wondering was, is this like the power of positive thinking, right?
Right.
Is this just putting on something that's not true? And
when your spouse really doesn't feel that way.
right. And what we found is actually the opposite, is that your spouse really does feel that way.
But
Yours.
prove it.
So here, prove it. Here's the data. So what we found and by the way, for those of you who aren't familiar with the way that we do our research, when we talk about what we found in our surveys, we're not talking about like a Facebook poll, for example. Mm-hmm. These are fairly large, very robust, very expensive. Expensive. Yeah. Expensive. He always says expensive. Nationally representative surveys. Almost all, not all, but almost all of our research, except for the one project that was an experiment, all the surveys have been nationally representative, which means that we're getting really good data.
That they can trust.
And what we found is that 99.26 something percent of people deeply care about their spouse. And what we found amongst the couples that were in distress, to me, was even more profound, because it's almost 100%, right? But the couples in distress, you think, oh, well, they're probably really low. Well, no. Even the couples that were in the most difficult situation, 97% of them deeply cared about their spouse. The issue is every one of us, with a very small exception ratio, which does unfortunately happen, almost every one of us really cares. But if you want a happy marriage, if you want to protect your marriage, if you want to heal a broken one, you have to let yourself believe it.
Yeah. So one of the things that we often hear in, couples talk about is that, look, I can try some of this stuff, but it really takes two of us. And if my spouse isn't willing to participate in this effort, what am I to do? So I might as well just kind of throw up my hands and go, oh well.
Yeah. And we found something very different about that with the secrets.
With all of the secrets that
and actually all of our research, yeah. But in this particular one.
Yeah. And let me unpack that a little if I can.
Yeah.
So when we were doing the research for this, I ran across a study that had been done by a professor at the University of Maryland with some college students, and it was called the Power of Good Intentions Study, and it was really, really fascinating. And before I tell you what the study was about, I just have to tip my hat to college students out there who are frankly willing to subject themselves to some of these studies for $20, and my goodness, we can get some good data. And
gotta love college students.
College students.
Absolutely.
So anyways, in this particular study, and when we say subject themselves,
this was one of those.
This was one of those. So you would have a college student, a volunteer, and they would be seated in a chair in a room. And while they were seated there, they were hooked up to all sorts of biometric measuring devices that would measure their heart rate, their respiration rate, their perspiration rate,
whatever.
all of those different factors that would indicate how the body is responding to some
Stimulus.
input. Yeah, some stimulus. So that was all pretty cool. But there was another facet to the experiment. They were also hooked up to a cable that was run across the room and disappeared behind a partition. On the other side of the partition was a little device with a red button on it. And the red button, when it was pushed, it would send an electric shock through the cable to the student seated there, and it hurt. And all of these biometric measuring devices would measure the impact on that particular individual of the shock. Now,
and they would also say their level of pain.
Sure, right. Now, the fascinating aspect of the study was that person sitting in the chair was told one of three different things about whoever it was that they couldn't see behind the partition. What they would be told in one instance was that the person pushing the button knows that it's sending a shock to you, but they've also been told that by pushing it, it's going to help you, the person sitting in the chair, win money.
So a good intention, right?
Right.
Towards you. Yeah.
And in the second instance, they were told that the person pushed the button, but they did it on accident. They didn't mean to send the shock.
So it was kind of neutral. It was a neutral
right.
thing.
And then in the third case, the person, they were told, knew that the depressing the button would send the shock, and they thought it was actually kind of cool to have that power.
Oh, dear.
And, enjoyed depressing the button.
Enjoyed giving the pain.
Yeah, so the level of the shock was exactly the same in all three instances. The interesting thing was how it registered on the person receiving. And if the person thought that the person behind the partition was sending or hitting the button on purpose for no good reason, it hurt quite a bit.
And it registered that way.
And it registered that way on the devices. If they thought the person was doing it on, accident, it hurt less. And if they thought the person was doing it from a standpoint that was a good intention, it hurt remarkably less. So it wasn't, the shock was the same. The only thing that was different was what the person sitting in the chair perceived about the other parties.
What they believed about the other parties. And it works the same way in marriage.
It does.
It's one of these things that we have to figure out how to get into our minds in those moments. And we'll talk about our example, as silly as it is, in a minute, as an example of that. But we have to tell ourselves that our spouse has our best intentions. Now, we need to say out loud, there are going to be some relationships that don't fall into this category, right?
For sure.
This is 99.26% or something, not 100%. Unfortunately. And we were doing an event that an old friend was at, and she came up to us afterwards, and she had been divorced and now was remarried and in a healthy marriage. And she said, I kind of feel like my ex-husband was in that whatever percent, because it was a very, very unfortunate situation where there really wasn't that goodwill. And so please hear us say that does happen. And if that is your situation, especially if there's a case of abuse and people have been trying to tell you that you need to get help, right? Like, don't just choose to believe the best if people that you trust, like a trusted pastor, for example, is saying you need to get to safety and get help. So don't hear us saying the opposite, because that is the case. However, the vast majority of marriages, we really, really care about each other, and it makes a difference. In fact, let me just tell you another two pieces of that study that Jeff was just talking about. Is that okay?
Yeah,
for
please.
me to mention it? Because that study came out in 2012. And it was right before, while we were in the middle of the research for The Surprising Secrets of Highly Happy Marriages book, doing this study, which came out in 2014. And so here we are 10 years later. And I thought, let me go back and read that study again. It had been a while. And I'd forgotten that there were 2 other experiments that he did. And because it was actually, not to get too technical, it was actually 2 different studies and several different experiments. Anyway, but in addition to the shock experiments, there was one that was inviting these people to sit in a massage chair and telling them that the massage they were given was programmed by a person for them or by a computer, kind of impersonal. And literally, the people who believed it was programmed for them by a person that, kind of cared, those massages felt better. Like they actually registered better. They felt better. They were rated better. And so there's a sense of, not just that my spouse doesn't dislike me, but that they really truly
want to do something nice.
Something nice for you. The third experiment was, again, college students stopped on the middle of campus, one of the main paths, and given a little box. And it had a Tootsie Roll and a note in it. And the note either said, I picked this out just for you, have a great day, or I just grabbed one from the bag for you, or something like that. Mm-hmm. And the people who felt like it was personalized, it was benevolent, it was caring. Tootsie Roll tasted sweeter. Like it's the same Tootsie Roll regardless. And, nobody knew what other people were eating and whatever. It was all, blind and that kind of stuff. But the literal rating of the of the sweetness of this changed with your belief. And it's the same way in marriage, because we so often don't notice the really good and sweet things.
That's right.
And we do notice the shock things.
Yeah, absolutely right.
And so we need to keep an eye that we're not just seeing the shock and missing the Tootsie Roll.
Yeah, that's correct. And I got to tell you, I mean, if I were a student and I'd heard that I subjected myself to the shock experiment and some other students on campus got the massage chair, I'd be a little chapped.
I'd be a little chapped too. That's hilarious. And we'll actually put the link to this study in the show notes because or the citation or whatever, just because I think some people are nerds like me.
Nerds like
and
you.
We'll want to actually go read the thing. But this is one of those where it's not so much about the theory that matters. Can we start unpacking what we do about it?
Yeah. Let's unpack. Does this involve an illustration of our own life?
Unfortunately, maybe.
Okay. Why don't I start, and you can fill in some of the color commentary as we go along.
All right.
So about 3 days ago, as Shaunti said, we were scheduled to record this particular topic and podcast. And in the mornings, we have it's almost like our date night morning
But it's
stuff.
We have coffee.
We have coffee together, and we spend an hour or so just kind of catching up on.
Sometimes we're just sitting there reading the news.
Sometimes that's all we're doing.
And by the way, can I just tell everybody out there, and I'm so sorry, I don't mean to brag in the face of the people who have the kids and are running around like crazy people like we were just a couple of years ago, but can I tell you how nice it is to be an empty nester? Like, this is a new thing for us, and not getting kids around and making lunches and all that kind of stuff is like, wow.
Freedom from making lunches is life-changing.
It is life-changing. Now, this is off topic, but I think you and I probably are like, we're not doing the things that parents are supposed to do. Some of our friends had their kids making lunches for themselves starting when they were like 8. And we were still doing that when our kids were.
I figure they've got enough time to do that for their life. But
anyway,
so here's what happened.
Here's what happened.
I had, for the last few months, known that I needed to make an up and back trip to Washington, D.C. Fly up there, spend a day, and then fly back the next day. And so a week or so ago, I was looking at various, flights from Atlanta to D.C., and I found one that was cheap on the carrier that we always fly. And I was like, oh, I am jumping on this.
And he didn't tell me about this.
Yeah, I didn't tell.
It's like fine, whatever.
So it was $157 round trip. Normally, I wouldn't say prices of things, but I just want
cheap.
I just want other guys listening to
You
this
go,
yeah,
yeah,
he's okay. So it was $157. So flash forward to 3 days ago, we're having coffee in the morning. And I'm reading an article in a newspaper, and it had something to do with airlines and airline lounges and all that sort of stuff. And I wanted to just chat with Shaunti a little bit about it. And I said, by the way, and I kind of entered into the conversation by just saying about I've got my ticket, and it was super cheap. It was great, $157.
And you were trying to use that to introduce the real topic of conversation, which, by the way, I still don't know what it is, what it was that you were going to tell me.
So as I am sharing that, Shaunti says, "Well, wow, that's a great price, but what time do you have to leave?
What time's the flight?"
And so I told her it's at 7:30.
No, you said 7. But anyway, see, the bottom line is that whatever the time was that he told me, I was working backwards and going, you're going to have to get up at like 4 in the morning. And I was like alarmed. I'm like, what? And I start pressing in on that a little bit. And I'm like, and maybe not a little bit, maybe a lot.
And it was, what time are you arriving in DC?
Wait, your meeting isn't until like 4. And what are you going to?
And so I'm responding.
And he's getting into DC at like 9:30 in the morning. And so he says, well, I'll just spend all day in the airport. I'm like, what? I started to go, but how much was the next ticket, that would have saved you that misery? And it was like $100 more, which, that's a lot, but it's not like it'll break the bank.
And so at that moment, I looked at her and I said, look, I didn't even want to talk about this. I was wanting to talk about something else, but now I really just don't want to talk at all. And we kind of finished our coffee.
In silence? In sort of frosty silence?
Frosty silence. And went on and both kind of agreed that maybe this isn't the right day to be talking about believing the best, because we were both struggling to do that. So let me tell you, should I tell the folks what was going on inside my mind, or how do you want to unpack this?
Here's because to try to use this example as here's what this means and what to do about it, because obviously we weren't perfect because we spent some time in frosty silence. Let me give just a big picture kind of sort of premise, behind it. Because in the moment, you're not necessarily going to do that. No, wait, my spouse has the best intentions. And it doesn't always sound like that anyway. And so what we've found over the years is that, yes, that recognition has to be in the back of your mind. But what really has to be in the front of your mind is to figure out, why did that make me so defensive? Why did that make me so upset? And you can go, oh, this is what I was believing about them. And that is a helpful trigger to help you understand what it was you were believing about your spouse.
So here is what I was thinking then. Here's what was going on inside of me. And as I say these things, a lot of what I'm going to say is probably common to guys, but it's not necessarily. I mean, men and women, we all have these feelings. But in this case, it was, I feel like I have to defend myself to her that I saved us $100. I was excited about that, and I thought she would have been excited and said, that's great. I really appreciate you being willing to sacrifice like that.
And spend the day in the airport.
And but I didn't get that. And instead, what I felt was I got an inquisition to defend my actions.
Which you thought were good actions,
which I thought were
good
actions. And then quickly following that thought was, see, this is why I just don't talk and don't share things, because I don't want to go through this. So it's better just not to say anything.
And unfortunately, in a lot of our studies, and I I could probably think of 4 right off the bat of our big national survey studies, at least 4, where we have seen that play out, especially among men, over and over and over. It's even common in many other studies. John Gottman found this. It's just more likely among men to say, I just need to shut down, right? Like, I can't open up.
I can't win.
I can't win, so I'm just going to shut down. And here's what I realized, and now, hearing this, when we started realizing this, it's like, it made me want to cry. Like,
You felt like a monster.
I kind of did. I didn't mean to make him feel that way, but then I realized there was a way that I was feeling that he didn't intend to make me feel either. And so what I was feeling, and this is honestly, it took a minute for me to sort of go, why was I jumping on that in that way? And so if you don't mind me being honest about this with our, closest friends out here, yes, because it helps with figuring out, what do you do? What I realized is that I felt like, because there is a difference in how Jeff and I view money, and any of you who have read our book, Thriving in Love and Money, you will know that Jeff is the saver. I am more comfortable with spending.
Though not a spendthrift.
I'm not a spendthrift. I'm not crazy, whatever. I know, our budget, blah, blah, blah. But I'm more willing to spend money. And because of this history, I found myself subconsciously thinking that he was judging me and that he was saying, look the lengths that I am willing to go to save money. You're not. When you travel on a Friday, you don't get up at 4 a.m. You take the slightly more rational flight, right?
Oh, more rational.
That's my view, right?
Okay, good point.
But that's honestly what was in there, was me thinking Jeff was saying, I will sacrifice because you won't. And playing the martyr and being judgy.
To be fair, this feeling that Shaunti is describing going on inside of her hasn't sprung up out of nothingness. There is history that we all have with our spouses.
And the feeling you were having about me didn't spring up out of nothingness either.
Correct.
We all have history.
Exactly.
And so I realized that my assumption was that he was kind of going, there, see what I'm willing to sacrifice. That was not what he was thinking at all, right? Like, he just was all excited about saving $100 and how creative. And he was like totally fine with hanging out in the airport all day, even though I think that's absolutely nuts.
As we go on in this podcast, I will share the stories of the lengths I go to save money. And it
you will
brings
hear a
me
few of those stories.
Great joy.
Yeah, and it makes me slightly crazy because I finally realize I feel like it's him saying, you're not doing this, Shaunti. And so we both realized that we were believing a story about the other person. And the only way to come back together is to go, you know what? The story I'm believing about the fact, because ultimately it's they don't care about me. They don't have the good intentions. They don't have good motivation towards me. The story I'm believing is not true at all. Now, are there twinges in Jeff if I'm willing to spend the extra $100 to get in at what I think of as a more rational time? Maybe, but that's not the same thing as him rolling his eyes and thinking, oh my gosh, she's just so horrible. You heard him say she's not a spendthrift. He knows that. And so we have to, when we are confronted with this, we have to choose to believe what we now know to be true.
Right. And again, back to an earlier point, some of these things that we know that we have to apply in our marriage, it doesn't happen instantaneous as far as in the moment. So it was frosty for a couple of hours, and we didn't film
the podcast. But can I also point out that because we've been doing this for now 10 years with this understanding of this believe the best thing, that has radically changed how we would have done this. I mean, it would have been 2 days.
Easily.
He's not actually
and let me say
for
the folks out there who have maybe family history where silent treatment and holding grudges are part of your background, think of it. Do you really want 2 days of feeling like that? Or let's address this after maybe it's an hour or two or whatever, and then move on and enjoy life and have peace of mind where you're not thinking constantly about this for 2 days? My goodness, when I finally realized that that was an option, it was
pretty life-changing.
It was.
Yeah. So we need to wrap up, but we want to always leave. This is a brand new podcast, so we're still getting our feet wet and figuring it out, but we really want, I wish you could hear this, to allow you to hear the one big takeaway. Like, what is the one thing that we most want you to know? And I think the way to say it is, when the next time that you are upset with your spouse, or they are upset with you, or both, is to remind yourself, you know what? I am probably believing something wrong right now. I'm telling myself a story that is not true about their intentions towards me. What is that? And reminding yourself, no. My spouse really does appreciate me. They really do love and care for me. So that's what we hope you take away.
That's what
from
we hope.
This episode.
It was fun being with y'all.
Thanks for listening to I Wish You Could Hear This. Remember to subscribe to our podcast. And as always, forward today's audio or video link to a friend, counselor, or pastor who would be encouraged.